every country does have a ruling elite. I mean, it's just the way societies form over time, and you can't really escape that fact. So, in a way, you could say democracy is an illusion. The idea that the masses rule. At the best you can have, no matter what form of government you have, you want to have people at the top who actually have the best interests of the country at heart. And I think that, more or less we had that, decades ago in the West, that, people felt that's one reason, people were desperate to get to the West, from places like the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact and communist China. Those were truly oppressive countries. We did have freedom, but, they were prosperous, well-run, orderly countries. But over time, our system of government, which did quite well back then, has been corrupted. And their systems of government, there's no longer a Soviet Union, but the Communist Party is still in charge, but it has undergone real reforms. It really has learned lessons from its mistakes, and it's really been very, very successful over the last few decades. So it's really, I think it comes down to, systems of government matter, but probably what matters most is the people that you have at the top. What kind of people, what kind of ethos they have. And at this time, the people that run the Western countries are really not devoted to the welfare of their own people. They're globalists that are, part of this hegemonic program, and they're committed to maintaining that hegemony. And it's to our detriment, that is to the peoples of the West, the various peoples of the West, but also, a real threat to global peace.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. China, I understand China still isn't perfect by any means. I lived through the 2022 COVID lockdowns in Shanghai, and I got to see how authoritarian China could be. But by and large, though, it seems like they do have the leaders, like you're saying, have the best interests of their country at heart. They make mistakes, and the system's not perfect, but it just, like you said, it doesn't seem like Western democracies, their purpose at heart is to preserve Western hegemony. It's not about the bettering the people, the lives of the people living there anymore. And I don't know, how do we get out of that? Can we get into a new system? Do you think that the whole thing kind of has to fall down, or is really the problem maybe is the fact that we have our money's broken, and that allowed it? Like, if you kind of track when the United States started to veer off course a bit more, is maybe after we got off the gold standard in 71, and then we began to finance all these wars just with our own money, and it allowed for the creation of this deep state to be just constantly going. But if we had real sound money, then it wouldn't allow for this continuous spending, and it would kind of keep the government in check, and then we could be a bit more realistic. Because I feel like the problem with democracies now is that just everybody just gets elected by spending more and more money, promising to give more and more money, and we have the printing press to do it. If it was supposed to be like, okay, you guys, I promise you this, then that means everybody's got to pay X amount more in taxes. Then, things would balance out, and we'd realize, there's a trade-off, but we don't have that mechanism. Yeah. So maybe democracies can't work without sound money. I don't.
Well, there's something to that. Obviously, sound money would put a brake on a lot of the adventures of the global elite. A perfect example is the Iraq War. I remember, it was easy to whip up this war frenzy, within the country and say, everybody said, let's go get Saddam Hussein, right? And the government could do it because they didn't actually have to send the people a bill, And it was not too long into the war, or shortly after the end of the war, that somebody figured, the economists did calculations and found out that, it would, to pay for what, the war has cost so far, it ended up costing a lot more. Like every American family would have to pay $40,000. And if with sound money, you would be, and a conservative fiscal system where you can't just print money at will, you would have to raise taxes, right, to cover that. And those people were saying, "You crazy? I'm not going to give you an extra $40,000. What is?" And they said, "Well, you wanted this war." I said, "Forget it. I don't want that war." That's what would happen. Obviously, it would put brakes on it. So that's an important point. But it's, of course, it's more than that. I think you look at, you can point to the going off the gold standard is an important step along this process of empire building. But don't forget that Eisenhower in his farewell speech, introduced the whole notion of the military-industrial complex. And he made it as a warning. He said, these people, they have too much power. We've created a monster. And that monster was created by World War II. It should have been dismantled after World War II. Just like, at the end of World War I, we basically went back to peacetime living, became a republic again. But after World War II, there were the people in charge wanted to keep, this apparatus that had been built up. And so I think that's actually that's another watershed moment. And then, of course, is the fall of the Soviet Union and the unipolar moment that resulted. And that also, we're looking at the consequences of all of those developments now.
So with the rise of the military-industrial complex after World War II, with the collapse of sound money in 1971, getting off the gold standard, and then with the fall of the Soviet Union, do you think these three things have kind of prevented the ability for democracy to work because we've had just sort of too much power now that is consolidated, that our democracy is essentially defunct, and they can't operate with these, with these events without sound money, with the military-industrial complex being as big as it is, and with the idea of Western hegemony after the fall of the Soviet Union?
Uh-huh. I think in the U.S., especially, the problems are just too huge to solve. I would, just looking at for example, the debt. That was something that, back in the 90s, some real efforts were made to solve it under Bill Clinton, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. And, we actually had a surplus in at least 1 year, maybe a couple of years. I mean, there was a real attempt to try to bring the problem under control, just talking about the debt there. Of course, at the same time, he was expanding the empire in Europe. But now it's so huge that, you just look at it and say, well, we're screwed. This is, there's nothing people don't even talk about it, just kind of hoping it doesn't collapse on my watch. I think that's the attitude that most people have, the ones that even think about it. The others don't even think about it. They just, but so I'm very pessimistic about the U.S. I just don't see a solution through the current system. In Europe, I'm a little bit more hopeful. I mean, first of all, you do have some European leaders that really have broken away from the consensus. And, we've talked about Serbia and Hungary and Slovakia. But even within the Western countries, okay, even though the globalists are still in charge, there's rising opposition. That we've seen it in Austria. We see it happening in Germany and in France, and I'm sure in other countries as well. And it just seems to me that the opposition that you find an intelligent opposition that really understands the problems in certain European countries. So I have some hope that maybe even through the present system, that some of these opposition parties can come to power and make a difference. Now, clearly, the establishment has shown that they're just not at all reluctant to employ all kinds of dirty tricks to keep them down, and maybe they just will. But I could see at least a possibility. In the U.S., unfortunately, with exception of a few exceptional individuals, such as Thomas Massey, I just don't see that kind of, I don't see a party. That's maybe part of the problem, is that we have this two-party system, and a multi-party system maybe makes it easier for an opposition, a real opposition, to rise. You start off small and you can grow.